David Suich is a retired engineer that got interested in the stories of people that have had near death experiences. And so he has interviewed over 1,000 people at this point that have had a near death experience. And he is a spiritual counselor now for people who have had near death experiences. So it was really fun to talk to David. I became interested in near death experiences after I had an experience at 19, not near death experience, but if you listen to the trailer of this podcast, you know that I had an experience at 19 that really turned my life around. I did a 180 and got me curious about a lot of things spiritually. Where is our soul? What is the soul? All of that. And I got interested in near death experiences of children at that time because I thought it was really interesting that many of their stories were so similar. And these are children that were really young and across all cultures. So I thought that was really quite interesting. So it was really a great experience for me to meet David and to talk to David about what he has learned from all of these people that have had near death experiences. David wrote the book God Took My Clothes. So he has chronicled, basically, it's a fantastic way of taking everything that he's learned and coming up with the themes of what is most common that people report from near death experiences. But so anyway, we talk all about that. I hope that you enjoy it and find it as uplifting as I did. What I love most is hearing how hopeful our future is from David. That's one of my favorite things that he talks about is what he has learned from about our future from the people who have gone to the other side, then clinically dead, and then come back to life here. So I hope that it is an inspiring listen for you. David, I am so excited to talk to you today. Welcome to the Nurse Soul podcast.
Thank you, Kelly. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Yeah, I started to tell you this earlier, so I'll tell you now. I had a profound spiritual experience when I was 19. I had come back from my freshman year of college a mess and was completely lost and did not, announce that I didn't believe in God, right? And then I had this really profound experience. And after that, somehow I got interested in near death experiences, mostly of children. So I started reading about near-death experiences of children, and I think I was mostly interested because the children, their stories were so similar, and they were all over the world, and I figured that couldn't be by accident, right? So I got really interested, and then life went on. I've always carried that in my heart and as an interest, but I've gone on and, done all the things that you do, and I think I just sort of left that behind. And then more recently, in the past year or so, I'm just more and more, I'm remembering how I'm curious about the soul. What is the soul? Where is the soul? And I feel like near death experiences or experiencers have a lot to share. So when I came across your work, of course, I'm super excited.
Mm.
And as a former qualitative researcher, I love your book because you take all the stories of all these people. I mean, you've had more than 1,000 people now, right? Well
Yes.
over 1,000 people that you've listened to their testimonies of this near-death experience that they've had. And then you put it together, you just synthesize it and put it together and get the themes. That's so exciting. I love that. So I can't wait to dig in there.
Yeah, you mentioned NDEs from children, which are a very unique set that I really enjoy because they're completely non-biased
Mhm.
and they don't have sort of the cultural, beliefs and personal beliefs developed yet. And so their testimonies are very authentic and beautiful. And, children, of course, are very valued and treasured from the other side of the veil.
Mhm.
Those who have been told about the future of humanity were told that in the future, our entire society will be focused on teaching children about God and love and nature and science. So, yeah, their testimonies are very special.
Yeah. That's one of my favorite things that you talk about is the hope for the future.
Mm.
So we'll get there. We'll probably wrap it up with that. But let's before we even dig into, because I want to hear how you got interested in near death experiencers. I know because I've heard you talk, but you were an engineer. You're a retired engineer, and so imagine you were quite skeptical at first. And so let's hear about your story, how you got there.
Well, it all started back in 1999, and I was working for the nation's largest utility. It was a division of Sempra Energy. And so I was a power plant engineer, and I still do a little bit of consulting on the side to bring in a little extra income.
Yeah.
And I got hit with severe tendonitis. It started in my hands and wrists, and then it went to my jaw
Mhm.
and my feet. And so I couldn't be on my feet too long. If I spoke too long, my jaw hurt. And of course, I was having a lot of difficulty doing computer work. And
Mhm.
as a power plant analyst, it requires very heavy computer work. And the pain became too great. I was very distraught. I had been trying to adjust and use voice control and things like that. And I was a Christian back then.
Mhm.
And I had gotten over a 7-8 year period. I had been prayed for by hundreds of people, dozens of churches, and I
Mhm.
had spent all sorts of money trying to heal myself, and it
Right.
was just getting worse. And in 2007, it came to sort of a really bad point, and I was off of work for a couple of weeks, and I was lying in bed thinking about my future, imagining the worst, which is what human beings tend to do. We tend to imagine the worst in the future.
Yep. Mhm.
And I came to a very painful conclusion. And I thought, well, it says in the Bible that, ask and it will be given. And that's not happening. So there's one of two things going on. Either there is no God, or more likely there's a God, but I'm not a good Christian. I'm the son that he's embarrassed of and, that he's ashamed of, and he doesn't want anything to do with me. And that was a very painful conclusion. And it was during that time I was just kind of trying to get my mind off of everything. And YouTube was fairly new back in 2007.
Mhm.
And in my feed, I just clicked on a random video. I wasn't even searching for any terms. I just opened YouTube and clicked on a video, and it was about this atheist who died, found himself in a hellish experience. He called out to Jesus actually for help
Mhm.
because he had been a Christian when he was a child, and Jesus came and got him. And that started me on a long journey of investigating near-death experiences. And I was quite shocked because when I started writing my book
Mhm.
and talking to people, I got all sorts of people just coming out of the woodwork who had never talked about their testimonies. My own aunt had died giving birth to my cousin and hadn't talked about it to anybody. She says, "Oh yeah, I was in heaven," and she told me about her experience. Even when I was looking for a car, I met a salesman who was missing his arm, and he says, "Oh, I was in a boating accident. I was water skiing and I fell, and the boat behind ran over me, severed my arm. I arrived at the hospital DOA. I said, well, did you see a light? Did you, come out of your body, see from above?" And he said, "That happened to you too?" He had never told anybody about it. And so I got the wonderful experience of just hearing all these testimonies, and it changed every aspect of my life. It changed
Yeah.
how I deal with my family, how I view nature, how I view politics, what I think about humanity and our future and our role here. And it was quite a transformative experience. And I'm grateful for all the people who freely shared their testimonies with me because it was a lifesaver for me personally.
Yeah, I love that story. And I love that I was laying in bed thinking about I don't know if I was thinking about my future at 19, miserable, not
Mm,
sure about God at all. And I actually prayed to my dead grandfather, who I'd always felt really close to, even though he died before I was born. So I wasn't sure about God, right? But I'm going to pray to the dead grandfather.
mm,
Like, and I just think when these spiritual experiences come, you're usually at this breaking point, and then there's this swooping in. For me, I felt like this overwhelming um, God figure pulling me up like on his lap, and I could no longer, I don't know, I just could no longer deny. right? So then you start looking for clues that maybe you're right and maybe there is more. Maybe there's, so interesting that we're on this. I could have been on my knees, but I wasn't. I was in the bed, right? Yeah. So for you, you're not in pain anymore. I know you were for a long time.
I'm not in severe pain anymore. I still have little remnants of it, but it's been going away, and I'm very grateful for that. I don't know what caused it, but I think it had something to do with getting out of the big city and getting out into nature. So after 40 years of living in California, in the LA area, I'm
Uh-huh.
now living in the middle of the woods on top of a mountain. I've got neighbors, but I can't see them. And nature has a very powerful healing energy, and it also creates an environment where there's more oxygen than there is in the middle of a big city. And I think
Yep.
there's some spiritual energies as well that were part of the healing. So I'm still in the process of it, but I am
Mhm.
mostly healed these days. Yes, and I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah. Nature is, I mean, that's pretty much where I am now, is helping people return to themselves. So spiritually and nature, we are nature. So the fact that we have somehow thought we're, separate and so that's mostly how I help people now, is return to themselves and return to nature. So I love that you brought that up, that that's been your journey too.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We have this cultural concept worldwide of nature being a resource,
Right.
natural resources, and we see it as something to be exploited and to profit from.
Mhm.
And that's a dangerous notion. We're part of nature,
Mhm.
and we've been treating it like it's there for us to use, and we haven't been living in harmony with it. But that's changing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Look at off-grid
Yeah.
living,
Yeah.
sustainable structures. That's been growing at 30% a year for 15 years now. So that's
Right.
tremendous growth. And of course, that's going to be the future of humanity, is living in harmony with nature.
Right. Yeah, very exciting. I got some goosebumps.
Mhm.
So we could just tell people, we could start with the end in mind and just tell them that the bottom line is love. Like what it all means, what we're all doing here, why any of this matters is love, even though that term isn't even close to the actual experience, right? The closest word we have, it's this quantum energy. And right?
Yes. Yes.
And
So love is a quantum based measurable energy. It's what the creative, benevolent source of all that is, that we call God, is made of. It projects onto all things and creates all things. And love is the glue of the universe. And that is the most common element of near death experiences. I hear things
Mhm.
after hearing over 1,000 testimonies. I hear things sometimes 3 or 4 times. I've heard about things like alternate versions of Earth and some crazy things like that. But
Mhm.
the one common element that I've heard hundreds of times is the importance of love. And near death experiences are shown that, the entire reason for our lives down here in these physical incarnations, it's all about love. They take you through these life reviews in these near death experiences, and it's not a judgment and it's not a criticism. They're just showing you the effect you have on other people. And when we are kind, loving, compassionate people, considerate of others, it makes all of heaven joyful. And when we are selfish or cruel or manipulative, it makes them a bit sad. And they talk about even the smallest act of love having so much importance.
Mhm.
Near death experiences will say things like, one person living in unconditional love is more powerful than millions living in fear. Or, if you bring hope or
Thank
joy to
goodness.
just
Right.
one soul, millions receive the vibration. So every little act of kindness, no matter how small, even if it's nothing more than, giving a little bit of food to a homeless person or holding the door open and smiling at somebody, uh, that's a huge thing to those in the afterlife. To them, it's all about love. And of course, this love can't be expressed in human terms. So
Mhm.
when near death experiencers come back and they talk about what the love of heaven is like, all we have is analogies, because it's something you have to experience. So some of those analogies are, one man said, imagine 100 happiest moments of your life and put them all into one moment. You still don't come close to what it like to be there in heaven. Another guy said, imagine the strongest love you've ever felt, and multiply it by about 500 or 1,000, and that's what it's like to be there. And another person said, if you had a genie, a magic lamp with a genie here on earth, and
Mhm.
you could wish for anything possible on earth, and not 3 wishes, unlimited wishes your whole lifetime, you still wouldn't be anywhere close to as happy as you are in the afterlife. So these lives are very difficult. I mean, earth is a tough place to incarnate, but when we go home, it's going to be an experience of joy beyond our imagination.
Right. And a couple things that you mentioned that I think are important to point out to people is that it's not a judgment, that it's not a place of a review. These reviews that a lot of people have when they experience a near death experience, they come back and they talk about these life reviews that they have, and it's like it's all happening at once, they say, and
Yes.
they're experiencing both it as themselves and every other person that was involved. And so you get like this, and you can't, there's no way you could describe it in words, right? That's why people have such a hard time. But you're
Yeah.
experiencing
So,
yours and
yeah.
their feelings.
Yeah. So the life review, I mean, in this life, in this consciousness that we're in, you're
Mhm,
used to being just one person, you, and you're seeing through your eyes and hearing through your ears and smelling through, all your own senses.
mhm,
And when you're in this life review, and just as you mentioned, people describe it as a panoramic life review. I mean, it's not like having to live a whole 80 years over again. They say it happens very fast, but
right.
you go through, some people only go through highlights, and others go through everything they ever saw, thought, said, felt, and did, with a
Mhm,
difference. Instead of being just you are you, and you experience it from the perspective of the people around you as if you're that person.
mhm,
So, for instance, one lady, she was on her way to work, and this was in the days before cell phones, and it was in the winter back east, and there was a stranded motorist. Another woman was stranded, and she was asking for a jump start. And this woman stopped and gave her a jump start, and didn't even wait to be thanked, and hurried off to work. And she thought nothing of it. Well, there she was in her life review, and she experienced it from the point of that woman who was becoming worried that nobody was stopping to help. I mean, people froze to death occasionally if they didn't get somebody stopping to help. And then all of a sudden, this angel comes and gives her a jump start and then leaves. Or, you give a meal to a homeless man, and then you experience being that man and not having eaten in a couple days. And then this person comes by and gives you a meal, and it just tastes so good. And one guy, for instance, who was a hospice worker
mhm,
and took care of the elderly near the end of life, he said that part of his life review was like emotional fireworks, because he would talk to these elderly people and cared about them. And then in
mhm.
his life review, he realized that some of them, he was the only one that was nice to them, and it
Right.
just meant so much to them. And so,
So
whether good or bad, you experience the effect, the emotional effect you had on others.
right. So if you were an ass, you get to see that too. Um,
Yes.
but not from a judgy place. And
No.
I know because I read your book, but people come back with a different view of everything you say, everything you do that you think nothing about. It is important.
Oh, yes. Every word you speak to another human being has an effect, good or bad. And so, it's made me much more aware to be
Mhm,
careful about what I say and do. It's made me realize, when I was in a bad mood in my pre near death experience life,
mhm.
um, if I was in a bad mood and I went out, everybody knew about it. Everybody knew I was in a bad mood. I was just cold and cruel and ruthless and mean. And now I'll still have the occasional day when I wake up and I'm mad at the world. We all have our down days. But when I go out, I make it a real point to not bring that out, put it on other people,
Yeah,
and just to put a smile on my face and to be as kind as possible. And even if it's something small, like you're out in public and there's a piece of trash there, and you pick it up and throw it away. Well, that means a lot to Mother Nature. She's
right.
an intelligent being. She's um, a has an intelligence and emotions just like we human beings do. And she knows when you're taking care of her. Just like if you were sitting across from your mom talking, you say, "Oh, mom, you got a little something there on your shirt," and clean it off for her. That's just a show of love. Yeah.
Right.
And so just every little act of kindness means a lot to heaven. And so it's changed the way I think. And of course, especially the way we treat those that our ego judges are enemies, or judges they don't deserve our kindness.
Mhm.
Being purposefully kind and loving and compassionate to those people that we don't like, that's the big one right there. That's what's really meaningful to
Oh,
those individuals.
David, that's so hard.
It
Um,
is.
and I think I'm a pretty nice person, but I am sometimes a little embarrassed, maybe is the right word, or disappointed in myself that I can still be so selfish, maybe, or get wrapped up in my own thoughts. And know that's not a great place to be, but sometimes it feels like it's almost like I can't help it. And I'm just wondering, for people, I know there are people listening that get it stuck in that anxious, worried, depressed, like in this negative, or they're in a bad mood and everybody knows about it. And to help pivot out of that, have you heard things from people? Because I know people that come back from near death experiences are still humans. So they still experience grouchiness and all the things. Like, we're here to be a human. I would assume that's part of the deal. But to pivot out of that, to just, if you can.
Yeah, that's the challenge, of course. But really, it's just a learning experience.
Right.
Whether you
Right.
are good or bad, whether you act in lightness or darkness,
Mhm.
it's all an important learning experience. So imagine if you were, you were a clone and you're a brand new human being and you've never eaten before, and they put you in front of a giant buffet that's got all sorts of food. Whether you pick something you don't like or you pick something you do like, you learn from both of those. And then you refine, what you eat to improve it. And so you really, as a human being down here, you really can't make a mistake. So
Good
you learn
point.
from all experiences. So I'll give you an example. It
Yeah.
is when we go through those negative experiences or acting in darkness when we learn the most and we learn the fastest. So heaven explains that there are two ways to learn things:
Mhm.
slowly over time in
Mhm.
an easy way, or quickly through suffering. So
Mhm.
when we're suffering, that's when we're growing the greatest. And the analogy I like to use is if you're trying to teach your child not to touch the hot stove, well,
Right.
you can do it slowly without the pain by every time he goes to, get near the stove. You say, no, sweetie, don't go near the stove. Don't touch it. It's hot. It's, can burn you. And over time, the child will learn not to touch the stove. Now, if you wish to allow the child to suffer, you can teach him in 1 second to never do that by just letting him touch the hot stove, and he'll
Mhm.
get burned, and he instantaneously learns. you know or
Mhm.
if you've got to go from where I am right now to a mile away on foot, well, I can take a nice leisurely walk and take 25 minutes. Or if I want to suffer and run as fast as I can, I make a lot of progress. Well, Earth is the fast progress learning experience, and it's the toughest planet in this galaxy to incarnate into. And
Mhm.
I'm not sure about this, but I believe it is the third most difficult in the entire universe. So it is like a big advanced learning course, and only advanced souls come here. And out of every 100 that are qualified and want to come here for the huge jump in consciousness and learning experience you get here, there's only one body for every 100 that want to be here. So if you're here on Earth right now, you are privileged. And it's a tough experience, and some people really struggle. But when you get to the other side of the veil, you're going to look back on your earthly life and say, wow, that was a really difficult but really amazing experience. I have to do that again. Of course, after a long break. You're going to want
Yeah,
to
I'm gonna
realize.
need to rest. I'm gonna need
Oh,
to rest
yeah.
a bit,
Yeah,
which I'm told there is rest. There,
absolutely.
souls. Yes. Do you want to talk about that at all? What you've
Well,
heard?
sure. So you wouldn't want a life where you never left the luxury and comfort of your home. So when you're at home, you've got an air conditioning and heated environment, and you've got comfortable furniture and a nice, warm, dry place to sleep. And it's a very comfortable, safe place. But you wouldn't want to spend your entire life in your home. Sometimes you want to go out and have an adventure. You might want to go on a hike or a scuba dive or
Mhm.
do something fun. And you go on a 7-day backpacking hike. You're going to suffer. You're not going to be comfortable, but you want to have these adventures.
Mhm.
And it's where you really learn and grow. You don't get stronger sitting at home in your lazy boy. You get
No,
strong going out and hiking or running or
right.
exercising or bike riding or something like that. And you don't want to spend 100% of your time out in adventures. That would be exhausting. So we
Mhm,
human beings are the same way. So our true home is heaven. It's where we've come from.
mhm,
And once in a while, the soul will say, I'm ready to have a lifetime. And they come down and they incarnate into a certain lifetime. And 80 years or so seems like a long time from our perspective. But when you're an eternal, immortal being, it's only the blink of an eye. And
mhm,
so you have these little lifetimes where you learn something. And some people choose some real difficult ones to do a lot of learning. And some people choose sort of a more relaxed life, like a vacation life type deal. I've had 3 or 4 lifetimes where I did some really hard challenges. So this time I'm going to be a wealthy person with no physical problems and no mental problems and pretty much happy go lucky my whole life. Well, we tend to envy those people and see them as successful.
mhm.
They're actually taking a breather. It's the homeless people who are doing the big work, or the people who are going through mental or physical challenges or emotional challenges. Those are the ones that are really making the progress. And by what we're doing down here, by these physical incarnations,
Mhm.
we are basically the engine of growth of creation. We're a critical part of that engine of
Growth.
growth, and
Mhm.
we are sort of creating the space for the love of heaven to exist. I mean, we're doing the universe a real favor, a real solid by being here. And to those on the other side of the veil, we are the courageous ones. We are the ones that they just honor and adore. It's like you're doing this great work for
Mm.
creation. And it's hard to believe that from our perspective,
Right, we're
but
like,
that's
"Wait,
that's the
what?"
reality of it
I
all.
can tell you, I so many times in this I've really had a really rough year, so I have said so many times, "All right, look, I realize I may have signed up for this, but can we renegotiate?" Like, I'm, like, looking for the easy button here. But this is really important for us to keep in mind for those that are struggling physically, emotionally, mentally. Like, do you think we signed up to have a life and we're doing the work down here, which is, and it's important for our growth. We are the courageous ones. Do you, best I can tell, we sign up for it. There are certain things that we said okay to.
Yeah, so what you do in heaven is you sit down with a group of elders and advisors, very wise souls, and you pick out a life and you plan your parents and all the major events. If you go through something like a divorce or an emotional breakdown or
Mhm.
a major accident, or you've got some sort of chronic disease like my tendonitis,
Yeah.
those major events are all planned. So now it's not like control. It's not like, oh, there's no free will because this is all planned. It's like a vacation itinerary.
Right.
And the soul can always choose to deviate from the itinerary once they're here. But
Mm.
it's pretty rare that somebody says, I'm going to Paris for a week, and they get there and say, well, I don't like this. I'm going to Tahiti instead. It happens, but it's not very common. And then a lot of the smaller details are filled in. And so there really are no victims. Every soul is aware of the potential before they came here, and many of them will choose to experience some traumatic things for the learning experience. You ever see this show?
Mhm.
It's on YouTube called I Shouldn't Be Alive.
Mm-mm.
It's about people who go through traumatic experiences. They get caught in the desert or in a mountaintop, or they're in some accident out in the wilderness and they think they're going to die and they're in a survival thing. And it's very interesting what happens
Mhm.
when they talk about the after effects. Relationships get healed. They tend to enjoy life more. It changes them for the better. A
Right.
traumatic experience does. And that's the same thing that an earthly life does. It
Right.
changes us for the better.
For the better. Yeah.
Yeah, it helps us grow our consciousness. Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah, I've heard traumatic growth is what I would call that, those experiences where you have this awakening after a traumatic experience and it's everything changes for you, right? And
Yes.
that's similar to what happens for folks with near death experiences. They die, they're clinically dead, and then they have this experience. They remember all kinds of things and they come back into their body and everything shifts, but that doesn't mean it's all groovy. So
No,
that's
I mean,
why
actually, that's
people
a
like
gutsy thing to
you
do.
help, right? Because it's hard to integrate it. And then if you can't talk about it, and especially if you have a super religious family or people around you don't want to hear about it or whatever, it can be difficult to integrate that, whether it was a traumatic experience, a near death experience, like to integrate back into your life can sometimes be like, oh, do I have to?
Sure, it can be very difficult. It's a gutsy move from a planning perspective. So not all NDEs are planned, but I think the majority are. And
Oh,
it's a
that's good
gutsy
to know.
move from a soul
Yeah.
perspective because you're experiencing pure perfection and pure joy and pure love beyond human words to describe. And then you got to come back to this place, which
Mhm,
is hell by comparison.
mhm,
And some people become very depressed and
mhm.
they long to go back there, but it is transformative. And then the people who are back, they make a much bigger contribution to the sort of energetic network of love on the planet. And the more people that are contributing positively to that, the faster the shift in consciousness is going to happen. And so people do have a difficult time. I remember one man, his name was Glenn. He was crushed by a military transport.
Uh-huh.
And he said when he came back from his near death experience, he just had this overwhelming love for everybody and he wanted to,
Right.
hug people and tell them, how beautiful they are and that I love you. And he wanted to be connected with people. And he was in this cold society where, that's not acceptable. He felt connected to everybody, but nobody wanted to connect with him. And he was very frustrated. And another man, for instance, came back and he said, he had a very hard time. He couldn't watch TV anymore. He'd see a
Yeah.
commercial for cosmetics and it was just foolishness to be concerned about the exterior body and not be focused on loving meaningful relationships. Or he'd watch an old western and somebody would shoot somebody else and he said that to show one human being
Mhm,
harming another for the purposes of entertainment is pure ignorance. And so they have a really hard time
mhm.
um, with the things that are normally accepted in our society, and it takes them a while to adjust. But most of them find their balance. A few people have tried committed suicide only to be, to have a second ND and be told, is, you are not to decide when you die. Don't do that again, and they get sent
Right.
back. So, but most of them adjust really well, and then make a larger contribution to I guess, the energy of love on the planet.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And bringing up suicide, I think it's important too. I've often wondered why a lot of people who experience a near death experience from an accident or something happening, they're told they want to stay on the other, and they're like, no, no, you have to go back. Some people are given a choice. You can stay or you can go back. And obviously, though, if we're hearing the testimonies, they've come back. And so with suicide, I feel like, I think it's so important to realize at any point we always have free will. We are co-creating and we have choice. So even when it doesn't seem like we have choice, we have choice. But with suicide, so we can talk about it in two ways. One, it's not a horrible thing over there. Like if once you hit the other side, you're accepted, right? It's
Well, yeah, you're not judged for committing
not judged.
suicide, but it actually is kind of a big no-no. And
Hmm.
it would be like if you were an incredibly brilliant person
Yeah.
and you got accepted to Harvard on a scholarship. And they said, get as many PhDs as you want, everything's paid for, and you spend the first 2 weeks smoking weed and not going to class, and the other people are look at you like, what are you doing? You've got this amazing opportunity and you're squandering it. I mean,
Mhm.
coming to earth is an amazing opportunity. And to just say, well, I know there was 100 other souls that wanted to come here and I was the one that got chosen, but yeah, I'm tired of it. I can't handle it. I'm out of here. And
Mhm.
it's a common thing. I mean, to come down here, especially if a person is somewhat still aware of the other side subconsciously.
Mhm.
And, it's difficult down here. I mean,
Mhm.
it's sort of the Mount Everest of physical incarnations. The purpose of life down here is not to suffer, but we know it's going to be part of the experience, and it can be a little too much for some souls.
Right.
If you ask people who climb Mount Everest, if you ask all of them, why did you climb Mount Everest? That you won't get one of them that says the main reason I did it is because I wanted to suffer. But if you asked all of them, did you know you were going to suffer in the experience and be tired and cold and exhausted? And they say, oh, yeah. So we knew how tough it was going to be when we come down here. And then when you're in the middle of it, it can just be really hard. And if that happens and you're thinking about it, don't give up. No matter what happens, I tell people don't give up on life. I was very depressed at one point in my life, and I would beg God. This went on for years. Take me home. I don't want to be here.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't imagine what was coming. I
Mm.
didn't imagine the transformation of my life that was going to happen. I didn't
Right.
imagine that the daily depression was going to go away and I was going to be happy most days and wake up with joy. And we often can't see the good that's coming. And you just got to stick with it and stay through the bad times, because, suicide's like dropping a class that you're just going to have to take to get through, college. You're
Again,
going to have to go back, and it's not a good thing. And it's the only time you ever hear the being of light, you ever hear God speak with a harsh tone. It's always loving, kind. The only time I ever hear from near-death experiences about a harshness or a sternness in his voice is suicides. They're told, you don't get to decide when you die. You are not to do that. So
when you go back, that is not, yeah. So some people don't make it back. So people, we all gonna die at some point. This returning, it sounds like most of the people, that was part of the plan in
yeah,
the
there's a plan. About most people plan their lives and when they're going to die, and they can change that. And they even plan how they die.
mm,
Um, so yeah, you go home, and I don't even like the word death, because it sounds like so final and
like it
sounds like the
ends,
end.
right? There's no end, right?
Right? Death is like waking up from a dream.
Right,
If
right.
you
That's a
maybe
good
had a very difficult life, it'd be like having a nightmare and you're all stressed out. And then you wake up and you go, oh, I'm in my bed. I'm safe. I was never in any danger. It was just a bad dream. That's how these lives are. No matter what happens, no matter how bad it is, you're going to get through it, and you're going to wake up someday and you'll be back home and safe and happy and realize you were never in any danger. You're
mhm,
immortal. You always have been. You always will be. We're part of God. And so we're eternal as God is.
right.
Lots of people believe in the afterlife, but there's less people who believe in a pre-life. Yeah, you've always existed. You existed before this life, you'll exist after, and you'll have many more incarnations. The average human, because more advanced souls come here, you
Mhm.
don't send a child who just learn to walk on a trek up Mount Everest. You got to have an experienced hiker. You got to have an experienced soul for Earth. And so the average human, if you add up all their physical incarnation lifetimes, they're probably over 1 million years old, is what I've heard.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
So we're older souls here. And the light workers,
Yeah.
somebody like you who would have a channel like this, you're probably the more advanced than that. You're probably 2 or 3 million years old. You have a lot of experience
Probably,
because you're doing less learning for yourself and more being a guiding light for others.
that's the hope. Some days that feels like I'm that old, right? And other times I'm like, I don't know. Like you should feel like you're more of a light than, but that's the hope. That's what we're trying to do here. That's what I'm hoping, that people hear what you're saying and feel hopeful and realize that it there is no end, and that creative we're these creative spiritual beings having a human experience, and that we signed up to do it, and we're
Mhm.
capable of doing it. We've got
Yeah,
what it takes to come.
that's exactly what I run into the occasional atheist who's gets upset with me for my beliefs. I
Right,
I
right.
just say, well, we have a lot in common. Well, what do you mean we have a lot in common? I said, well, you believe that we're human beings pretending that there's a God, and I believe we're little facets of God pretending that we're human. We're just believe the same thing. It's just reversed, right? And
Right.
of course, the other thing I have in common with the atheist is, at the core of it, we both hope that they're wrong and that I'm right. So, I mean, my father's agnostic, but he's admitted, yeah, I hope you're right. I don't think you are, but I hope you are.
Right.
And that's okay. It's Heaven doesn't have any judgments about our judgments. So even if we don't acknowledge God, every human being acknowledges love. They're all acknowledging the peace of God they see as love, because
Mm,
love comes from the source, comes from God. And so
right.
every human being has love at the core of who they are, is the love of God. At the core of the Cryon, channeled by Lee Carroll, he says, at the core even of a The space between atoms is the love of creation.
Right.
It's all around. It's everywhere. It's the energy that projects in all things. And of course,
Yeah.
we're all a part of it. And whether we
Yeah.
have this amnesia and have forgotten about our heavenly origin, that's okay. Heaven's okay with that. And they don't
Mm.
have judgments about that. They're okay with us choosing a religion or not having a religion or being an atheist, because even atheists show love to others. We all show love. Yeah.
Right. That's a good point. Are there other themes that you think are important for people to hear? If there are people listening that are struggling, what are the themes that is there anything we haven't covered that near death experiencers bring back to us that might help people understand?
Well, there's a couple things that come to mind. The first is you wanted to come here.
Mm.
You applied, you worked a long time, you had many lifetimes on easier planets, and this is
Mhm.
what you wanted to do. You wanted to come here. If the souls that come to Earth to incarnate here had a business card, it would read something like daredevil souls, experts in transforming planets and helping humanity become an ascended species. They come down here and they transform, and it's a tough job. And you're honored by heaven. Cryon, channeled by Lee Carroll, he's one of my favorite trance channelers. He gives a little talk called The Forgotten Conversation, about the
Mhm.
conversation he has with souls before they incarnate here. And if you want to hear that, you can go to stepsofhope.org/temp, TEMP, stepsofhope.org/temp, and you'll see some meditations and so forth. And one of them is called The Forgotten Conversation. And it's a little 15-minute blurb about how we're brave souls coming down here, how we're doing a big favor for creation by coming down here, and how we're honored by those on the other side of the veil. I know it's a tough life down here, and you're not failing. Just because you're struggling doesn't mean you're failing.
In
And
fact,
we
that might mean
tend to
we're
confuse
winning.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So even
Yeah.
those who have what seem like a
Mhm.
failure of a life to humans.
Yeah.
So, a human being would look at a homeless drug addict
Mm.
who dies on the streets and say that man was a failure. No, he was not. He had a huge jump in consciousness by experiencing that difficult life. Often what we see as from a human perspective as a huge failure is a great success to heaven. And often what we see from our human perspectives as a great success is a huge failure to heaven.
Right.
We see these, billionaires who are living in luxury, and well, some of those are failures. you know, they're not, fulfilling the purpose that they should have been fulfilling. They were given a great gift and they're using it for themselves instead of making a contribution to humanity, valuable contribution to humanity. And there's nothing wrong with being selfish. It seems like a dirty word in our culture.
Mhm.
The reason it's such a dirty word is because we have a society that's out of balance with selfishness. So there's service to self and service to humanity. And if we're all connected, if I do something to help myself, it helps the whole because we're all connected. If I do something to serve humanity, it helps the whole. But out of control selfishness causes problems. People, ripping off elderly people from their retirement for their own gain and things like that. So there's nothing wrong with selfishness. It's just an out of balance society. But we're moving back into balance, and it's going to take time. In about 4 decades or so is going to be the beginning of peace on Earth. And that's just the first step. And then things will really get exciting. And humanity's got a bright future. And the reason they have a bright future is because the brave souls, the ones listening to this podcast, if you're here on Earth and you're listening to this podcast right now, you're a brave soul and you came down here to transform this planet. And the game is over. It's been won. Now it's just a matter of the plan working itself out. We've passed a marker. We've passed a point of no return. We're not going to destroy ourselves. There's not going to be an Armageddon. It's suddenly, human beings are extinct. We're going to become an ascended species, and it's going to be sort of like a paradise on Earth. And it's because
Yeah.
you came down here and you did a good job and you're working hard and you're trying your best to be spreading the message of love and compassion. And
Yeah.
so kudos to the people who are here.
Yeah, kudos to the people who are here. Yeah, that's my favorite part of when you talk is about the hope. and that we've passed, like, you have it on good authority that we
From
passed the
multiple
benchmark.
sources. Yeah, so we had a lot of help from above, and
Yeah.
I'm not just talking about heaven. I'm talking about, of all the species in our galaxy, about 95% of them are either benevolent or sort of indifferent. Most of them are benevolent, and there's 5% that are kind of misbehaving, but they're kept in check by the 95%, so they don't cause too many problems. And so we got help from them, the
Mm,
Pleiadians. So when you become an ascended planet, one of
mhm,
your job then becomes to seed life on another planet. So the Arcturians seeded life in the Pleiades seeded life on Earth. So they're our cosmic parents. They're kind of watching over us and protecting us. Someday they'll show up. We're not ready for it yet. I mean, if you had a neighbor
mhm,
and that neighbor, you knew he spent half of his income on weapons, guns, and all sorts of weapons.
mhm,
And if you were unknown and you showed up to his door, he wouldn't show up pointing the gun at you, but he'd have it by his side ready to shoot. You wouldn't knock on his door and introduce yourself to him. Well,
mm,
what would happen if a spaceship landed on the White House lawn? Would they be met with hugs and flowers or a military response?
right. Yeah.
And that the US government spends half their money on military. They're just like that neighbor I just described. We're not ready yet to
Mm,
meet them. And
mhm,
when we are ready, they'll show up and make themselves known and, explain who they are. And
right.
it'll be a wonderful time.
I'm hopeful because I I'm concerned for younger generations. I'm hopeful for all of them. So, like most people, it was really happy. I'm happy to hear that. Is there something like we don't need to do anything, or are there things we need to do to get ready to be ready for that?
Well, the best way to get ready is to live every moment of your life with the most love and compassion that you can.
Yeah.
And you're going to fail sometimes, and it's part of the game down here. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
um, just being human. If you were God, if you were perfect, we'd have to call you God instead of Kelly, right? So,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
nobody's perfect down here. It's part of the game. We come down here and we have our flaws. We choose our flaws,
Yeah.
and it's part of the creation process. So it's okay to make mistakes, but just do your best to get through every day. I tell people, turn the news off. The news
Oh,
is a
turn the
well-crafted
news
cure
off.
report. It's poison to the soul. Now
Yeah.
remember, we're creator gods. And
Yeah.
it's not like, we have this idea that Susie's been a good girl and so she's going to get rewarded, and Johnny's been a bad boy so he's going to be punished. No, the universe doesn't work that way. That biblical verse, be not deceived, God is not mocked, for wherever the man soweth, that shall he also reap. That's not some threat of punishment. You better obey God or there's going to be consequences. No, that is whatever you sow, you're going to reap. If you want to go around being selfish and cruel, manipulative, you'll get that kind of life and all the negative stuff it brings. You go around being loving and compassionate and kind, you're going to you grow more of that. So when you focus on negative, like the news, you get more of it. And so if
Mhm.
you're going to watch news, go to the Good News Network. They got a YouTube channel, they got a web page, and read the good news. And the human brain, the human consciousness was not meant to take on the chaos and drama and suffering of an entire planet. And that's what the news brings to you. So I tell people, just pay attention to your world, the people you interact with every day, and do your best to be a light and to be a joy and to bring
Mhm.
hope to people, even if it's nothing more than you see a waitress at the restaurant you're at having a bad day and just saying, I know it's tough working, being on your feet all day, and thank you for doing that so we can have a nice meal.
Yes.
Just something small like that. It doesn't have to be. Mother Teresa said, we can't all do great things, but we can do small things with great love. And that's what
Mhm.
it's all about.
Right. Yeah, in your own community, in your own neighborhood. Yeah, I agree 100% with that.
Mhm.
Just start small. And I do think that that's one of the most helpful things you can do if you're feeling really awful is to just start finding some way that you can be nice to somebody. Hold the door, smile.
Yeah.
Um, something to get out of yourself essentially, but just some little thing that could help that you could be kind.
Yeah, I remember reading about a study they did many years ago with people who were chronically and clinically depressed,
Yes.
and medications and treatment and all sorts of things, nothing seemed to work. And what they did is they took these people, and for 1 week, they had them do various things. They'd volunteer in a soup kitchen one day, giving out food to the homeless. And the next day they'd go and they'd, paint over graffiti. And the next day they'd go and visit some elderly people in an old folks home. And
Mhm.
after a week, most of them reported feeling better. So
Mhm.
when we focus on service to humanity and being loving and compassionate to others, that energy comes back and it
Yeah.
raises our vibration.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a really good point you make. Yeah, it can actually boost your mood just being kind to others.
Yeah. Yeah, it can do a lot, right? You're not just helping other people, you're helping your own vibration. So that's awesome. So you are somebody that you tell me about this book though. How did you get the name God Took My Clothes? Where
Well,
did you get
actually,
this?
the very first near-death experience I ever heard was Howard Storm, and
Mhm.
his entire 20-minute, uh he had a YouTube video. It was the first YouTube video I clicked on, and I
Right.
transcribed it in the book, in the chapter on hell.
Yep.
And, he was actually naked the whole time in the afterlife. So, you kind of project what you believe. And so he was in a hellish environment and got his clothes ripped off of him, and Jesus came and got him. And he was very embarrassed. And, he kind of covered himself up at first. And the idea, of course, that they have is like, do you freak out when you see a dog walking down the street with no clothes on? And you're like, no, that's just what a dog looks like. Well, just like what a human looks like. Well, I couldn't think of the name for the book. And I was with a friend of mine who doesn't even believe in all this stuff. And I'm just like, what's a good name for the book? And he said, he just blurted out, God Took My Clothes. And I went, I like that name, but how does that fit? Oh, the first testimony I ever heard, he was in the afterlife naked. And so it
Mhm.
fit. And so that was the title of the book.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And I think it's a really good book for people who are new to near death experiences and they not have the time to start learning, interviewing other people, listening to all the testimonies. They can go straight to your book and learn all of the themes, and you just lay it out really nicely for people. So if they're new to spirituality or they're new to near death experiencers, it's a great place to get
yeah,
informed.
you summed it up well. It's sort of spirituality 101. So there are
Yeah.
lots of books that are very high esoteric subjects, and if you're spiritual, you can understand them. And there are lots of individual testimonies of near-death experiences in their books, but I didn't see anything out there when I wrote my book that kind of summarized it all. And people say things like, some of the ideas are far-fetched, and well, sure. Anytime you talk about an idea that's not accepted by the cultural paradigm of beliefs of society, you're going to get that. Over 500 years ago, uh, a man worked out the math and said the Earth is going around the sun at 90 miles a second. We're not the center of the universe. Of course, that was Nicholas Copernicus in his book on the revolution of the celestial spheres. And people thought he was nuts. He was a mad scientist for
Oh,
saying
right.
that. The
Right.
Earth moving. And then, you have people like Richard Owen in 1841. He examined large bone and teeth fragments and speculated that there were once giant lizards roaming the earth that he called Dinosauria, and he was laughed at by the scientific community. They all thought it was a hoax, and even as late as 1912, Alfred Wegener suggested the idea that continents were slowly drifting across the surface of the earth. He was laughed at and ridiculed by the scientific community. So whenever you're first with an idea, it's going to seem crazy and far fetched, but it's
Mhm.
sort of just an intro to it all. And yeah, some of it's going to seem pretty crazy and far fetched, but I encourage people to keep an open mind and listen to what their heart tells them, because
Yeah.
the heart of any individual is far more knowledgeable than any other person's intellect. So the heart really knows and understands. It's what's connected to the divine. And so, you listen to your heart as you read or hear anything, even a podcast like this,
Yeah.
listen to
Anything.
what rings true for you is what I tell people.
Right. Exactly, exactly. So and now you help other people. So you're doing the light work, you're putting the information out there, helping people, and then people can come to you because you counsel people with
Yeah, I'm a
bad near-death
certified
experiences.
spiritual counselor for people who have had near-death experiences or out-of-body experiences or something like what you went through, which was called an STE, spiritually transformative experience. And it can be traumatic because you adopt an entirely new set of beliefs and you're sort of not connected to society anymore. And
Mhm.
things that seem crazy to you are completely accepted in society, like, war. I mean, for a spiritually awake person, that's completely barbaric.
Right,
That's
doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
you know, and people think that, when we become an ascended planet, we're all going to be holding hands, singing kumbaya, and we'll all be on the same page with our beliefs. We're not. We're not going to be that way. But it'll be like a a family that loves each other. You know, the brothers and sisters may get in arguments and have their differences, but they're not going to pick up guns and start shooting each other. They're going to be civil and, that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Mm, that sounds nice. Yeah, so you're somebody who pours a lot out. What nourishes your soul, body, mind, soul?
Well, I was told a long time ago by one of the guys I interviewed who had a near death experience that I was a teacher.
Mm,
And I wasn't really fulfilled till I started doing teaching. And so this is my 27th podcast appearance, and I've been on the radio a couple times, and that's what really fulfills me is being able to talk to
mhm,
open-minded people who accept the message of love, our eternal nature, and who we are. That's what really energizes me. And I really enjoy the spiritual counseling as well. I mean, some of my clients are going through some tough times, and some of the sessions are a little difficult, but the vast majority of them, I mean, if I have a counseling session first thing in the morning,
mhm,
that's going to be a great day because I just really enjoy helping people. I get these clients that are either confused or they're anxious or depressed or upset about something, and by the end of our 2-hour session they're laughing and smiling, and it's a real blessing that I've been given this gift and position to be able to help others. That's what really energizes me. Yeah,
mhm,
and then of course seeing the progress that humanity is making, especially a lot of young people are coming up with solutions to problems, to age-old problems, and
mhm,
all the people who are working, what I would say, light workers, who are working to bring us together instead of this division that we're seeing, who are working to unite humanity via love.
mhm.
That's what really encourages me, and there's a lot of that. We don't see it on the news. They like to report the negative, but there's
Right.
way more love these days than there is fear, and way
Ah,
more people working in love than in fear.
mhm, mhm. Love it. Is there anything that we didn't cover, David, that
Well,
you
not that
wanted
I
to
can think
share?
of off the top
Yeah.
of my head. I would say that the last thing I'd like to sort of mention is that Cryon talks about the dance of consciousness being one of 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And
Mhm,
that's the way it is. And it doesn't take much to look around and survey the world today and see we're in a step back phase right now.
mm,
In the early 1960s, the hippies kind of blasted forward in consciousness, and then we took a step back, and there's going to be some difficult times ahead. There's going to be some financial turmoil and social turmoil, and there'll be more wars. Not there won't be any worldwide wars, but there'll be some major wars. And this is all the darkness working itself out. I mean, it's all coming to the surface right now. All the stuff that was hidden is coming to the surface. And as it's coming to the surface, it's being dealt with. And so I would tell people that don't lose heart, just see it for what it is,
mhm,
which is a rapid transformation of humanity. And we are moving towards a bright future. So, when the storms are coming, whether it's a financial, a social, or whatever kind of storm, you can't calm the storm. What you can do is calm yourself, and the storm's going to pass. And so just stay focused on the positive. Don't freak out when you see, horrible things happening. Take a deep breath and know that it's all going to be okay in the end. We've won
mm,
the game, and we will go home
mm,
someday and
mhm,
come back to a better Earth.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. Some of us might need to take a little break,
Oh
um,
yeah.
for a
Some will
while,
take a long break.
a long break. Yeah,
Yeah, sure. You want to go out for 2 weeks hiking in the mountains? You need a long break before you're ready to do that again.
yeah,
And so,
yeah.
yeah, these lives are difficult, and we often take a very long break in heaven before we come back. But see, human beings are such daredevil souls that we don't take. A lot of us don't take very long breaks.
Mhm.
We're back in heaven, and it's not too long before they get antsy and say, "Oh, I got to
Put
get
me
back
back
there,
in,
do some
coach.
more
Put me
work."
back in. Yeah, yeah. I can do it. I got this. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you, David. I so love talking to you. I will make sure everybody knows how to find you, put your website up. We'll have how they can get the book. I mean, you can get it anywhere, Amazon, all the major
Barnes and
booksellers,
Nobles, Books a
Barnes and
Million,
Noble.
yeah, and it's in
Yeah.
Nook and Kindle.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
All right.
Perfect.
Well, it was a pleasure being on your channel today. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really enjoyed our conversation. You asked some great questions.
Yeah. Thanks, David.